All right. Well, today on IT Trendsetters, we got Tony from Infoblox. Tony, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
All right. So just so you know, our audience here is a bunch of geek, nerdy people. So hopefully you can bring that for us today.
I forgot my tape, but I'm missing a nose thing, so we're good. There we go.
So before we get going here, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, thanks. My name is Tony Velada. I'm a channel systems architect. They change our titles. We're architects now with Infoblox. So I support our channel partners. I have a technical background. My job is to make sure that our cams don't sell you guys anti-gravity boots and to make sure that you guys understand our technology properly, so you can position it to our customers. So that's what I do.
All right. So I was stalking you on the internet a little bit before our talk today. So it looks like you're out in Washington, but you were at Infoblox for a while, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it looks like a while back, you left and you came back. So
yeah,
tell us a little bit about that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I've been with Infoblox for a while, for about 3.5, 4 years at that point. And then I was just looking for something a little different. I wanted to expand a little deeper into security, so I had an opportunity to move to another VAR for a little time. And then I had an opportunity to come back to Infoblox, and it was kind of, I like this capacity I'm in now. It feels like more enablement, it feels more strategic, right? And it feels like I can take the message that we have and reach more people more effectively.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what are we going to talk about today?
DNS and how it can be used. How it can be used to break into your network, cause issues.
Let's
Yes.
rock and roll.
How it can be used, not according to the parameters. So, a little quick story to start. About 10 years ago, maybe a little more, we had Cricket Lou come and sign his book he had just written, which
Yes.
was a while ago. So
Yep.
that was up at Lambeau Field.
Oh, nice.
And so we've had a long relationship with Infoblox, and Cricket's still there.
Yeah, he is. He'll still sign your books, too.
He'll still sign books. So great. So let's talk about everybody's aware of phishing. That's been a big topic of conversation. And before I get into that, though, I got to digress for a second here. You always had that data exfiltration test where you could you go into someone's company and you would basically take a DNS channel and send data out.
Yes.
How successful is that still for people that have normal DNS setups?
It's an eye-opener.
Yes.
It really is an eye-opener because, so what's happening is the bad actors have figured out a way to use DNS as it normally functions to actually carry out a side channel of communication. And it circumvents many of your security solutions today, right? Imagine this for a second. Imagine that if you're able to take a file, it could be any file, it could be a text file, it could be a binary file, whatever. If I were to convert that to alphanumeric text, right, or
Make it look like
hexafile.
text. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Unix, everything's a file, right?
Yep, right.
The lost art of command line. It's beautiful.
Right.
Anyways, so if you were to take any file, format it, take that encrypted format for each line, you create a fully qualified domain name. And it can be simple, like, payload.domain.com, or it can be payload.sequence number.file type. It can be, and the payload doesn't always have to be in the host name portion. It can be buried down multiple levels, right? But to you and me, okay, here's the scenario. Let me digress for a minute. 100 years ago when I was in high school, didn't have cell phones, didn't have Uber, right? I had to rely on a school bus schedule. Let's just say sometimes, more often than not, I had to stay after school. And by the time I was dismissed, I would miss the activity bus. And I'd have to call home and get a ride from my mom. Well, my mom got sick of giving me quarters all the time. So she's like, listen, you either got to stop getting detention or find another, we got to work something else. And it's like, next time you have to call me, this is what I want you to do, okay? And I'm sorry if I'm incriminating anyone, but hopefully the statutes of limitations apply here. But she would have me go to the payphone, pick it up, and then you listen for the dial tone. I'm kind of illustrating the protocol of making a collect call. Dial the operator, right? The operator, a person, actually picks up the phone and says, this is the operator, how may I help you? Now, what I would say is, yes, I'd like to make a collect call to whatever, 588-2300, right? And then she would place me on a brief hold. She would get the other party, which in this case would be my mom, right? And she would establish a three-way conversation. And I don't think the idea, what we know as mute, existed back in those analog days. So what's supposed to happen next is the operator would have that three-way conversation and say, I have a collect call from Tony. Do you accept the charges?
You know where this is going. Yes.
Yes, you probably know where this is going. Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
Mom tells me, okay, when the operator asks me if I'm going to accept the charges, she didn't say it in these terms, but I'm going to talk in geek speak. You are to insert a packet into the conversation and simply say, hi, Mom, which she will receive that without an acknowledgement to that, but she will instead acknowledge the operator saying, no, I will not accept the charges. And then 20 minutes later, she'd show up in her Caprice Classic, and I'd get an earful about, but I got a ride home, and it didn't cost me a quarter. Now, I probably owe the phone company $10 plus interest, but there's a protocol, and I exploited it. What's the DNS protocol? What is DNS? DNS is like the phone book of the internet. You and I, we remember names. Computers, they talk numbers, right? I remember there used to be a time back in the payphone days where I would have 5, 10 numbers memorized off the top of my head. And I still have one, my grandma's old number that it's in my head, right? But yeah. But now it's like, yeah, you look in your contacts, there's hundreds there, right? That's what DNS does. It's a translator. But here's the thing. DNS is a foundational protocol. It was written in 1983. It was adopted 86, 87, and they were replacing host files. Now, the internet existed back then, but it was a much different place. I, like most people, didn't get access to the internet until 1991. And it's like, what is this, right? But this thing had been around, but access to it had been limited to certain universities and the government, right? I'm sure they had security issues, but it was a much different place. You know, Unix, I mean, even in some places today, Unix is an open system. You can go and search into someone's home directory, but that was the nature of it back then. It was an operating system designed for programmers. But anyways, why am I talking about Unix? Because it's foundational. What are some other foundational protocols that over the last 20 years we've shut down?
HTTP is a foundational protocol. No, is that the one you're on?
What did we switch to? HTTPS.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Why? Because
Right,
plain
security.
telnet, right?
Secure shell, yeah.
To secure shell, right? And then we talk about, oh, let's take away root access, but that's a whole different subject that we can, whatever. We can talk about that at the next one. Foundational protocols, they still exist, but once we've identified risks, given the new environment, we have to make adjustments, and the industry responds. After a while, you cover up these holes, but it's still Swiss cheese, right? And right now, that hole is UDP port 53. I said a lot there. Did that? And I hope I didn't lose you.
No, it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
So a tool that can control that. So give me what are the 2 or 3 things that our clients should be aware of, that the use case that, what do they need to do to validate
Well, here.
how big of a risk this is to them, or to take care of
Understand that DNS is going to be here for a while.
Right.
We can't just write a new, directory
standard,
and just
right, yeah.
adopt it.
Right.
Right. It's going to be here for a while. We have to bring it to a point where it could be stable to today's needs. That means, adding capabilities for high availability, making, be able to do upgrades without interruption, right? To be solid, to be able to participate in OSPF and BGP conversations and advertise routes. You need those features to compete. The business is asking you for all kinds of stuff. There used to be a time when we had perimeters. What blew that away? BYOD, IoT.
Right, yep, right.
The business wants it, right?
Right.
But it's like, okay, you got to catch up to it, but the technology still has to be secure. Now, here's the thing about a DNS attack. Last week, what did we had 5.5 hours was gifted back to the world because there was an outage with Facebook, right? They had network change related outage. If you look at Facebook Engineering's page, there's a write-up on what exactly happened. A network change impacted the connectivity of DNS. So imagine like all of their DNS servers that are authoritative for Facebook.com, WhatsApp, and what's the other one? Instagram. All of a sudden, boom, gone, unavailable. Now, the system worked as expected if you follow kind of the chain of events. And let me tell you, from firsthand experience, I feel sorry for that guy. A DNS outage hurts because at first it's like, okay, someone's having a problem with email. Someone's having a problem, this or with that.
Some people have it cached, so it's still working.
Then all of a sudden, boom. Right. And then when you bring it back up, there's this backlog of requests. Yeah. It's literally a storm, right? It's a 30-year-old protocol we rely on, and we have to make it reliable, but now we also have to make it secure. There's all kinds of DNS attacks. Remember from, 2016, the Dyn attack? That was the distributed denial of service attack intended to take down that server, okay? This Facebook incident was not, at least it's not obvious as an attack. And according to Facebook Engineering, it was a change-related issue. And then, it's something in their automation that they have to tweak because there were some checks that passed that shouldn't have passed, right? That's great. And the fact that they got their system back up in time is really remarkable. But not everyone has a staff like Facebook. And it's important to illustrate that this wasn't an attack. The bad actors, they don't care if you're Facebook or if you're Joe's coffee shop. If you're a place where that's permeable and I can launch an attack from you, that's it, right? And your DNS doesn't have to be attacked in order for you to have an impact. The Dyn attack, Infoblox wasn't the Dyn customer, but we used Okta. And whoever else used Okta then probably had some interruptions as well, right? We weren't attacked, but we were impacted by it. Now, I cut from social media as of late, so the Facebook outage didn't really impact me, but it gave me some cool stuff to talk about for work, right? But, one is meant to take down. One outage was caused by normal changes, normal data. Nobody's perfect, right? But then in worst case, what if you were attacked? You still have to keep DNS up and reliable, but now you have this added pressure of the attacks coming from. Now, these particular stuff, these are the attacks that Cisco indicates that 91% of malware use DNS throughout their campaigns. This is the attacks that Verizon and Cisco did a study on data breaches, and they found 60% of malware resulted in data being exfiltrated within the first 24 hours of infection. Okay, here's a question for you. As they were researching the SolarWinds breach, how long did they think that the bad actors had been in there?
3 months?
Over a year.
Over a year, okay.
Over a year.
Wow.
Yeah, and in 2020, it's like 280 days, an average company to know that they've been breached and to have remediated it. Okay. 280 days, that's almost a year, right? If a piece of malware can get into your network and start exfiltrating data within 24 hours, I'd dare to say within an hour, because all it has to do is DNS queries. Right. It can be there right now. Just mixing those DNS queries along with everyone else. And a lot of companies don't have visibility because without any kind of database tool, you'd have to turn on query logging and analyze it and aggregate it. And you got to be careful when you turn on query logging because you might fill up your file system, which in many cases might be an Active Directory server. So if you fill up a file system in Active Directory, you could have other problems too, on top of your DNS problems. So it's important we need to really take a serious look at DNS, really consider that it's been around for 30 years, but companies, especially today in the digital transformation, with COVID, everyone working from home. Over the last 7 years, Infoblox has been working on our cloud platform, and now we're also able to deploy our security and our DDI to places where they couldn't have gone before. You scale up. Think of a big coffee company that has thousands of locations. Right. How many Infoblox grids would that take to manage? Now we can do it from, if you can imagine Meraki, but for core networking services. You manage up in the cloud, then you have these lightweight little appliances or Docker containers or whatever, and you deploy them everywhere, and it can do your DNS, your DHCP, and your security, right? And it all orchestrates back into your ecosystem. And the problem this is trying to solve, the whole exfiltration and communication, if we were to look on the wire at that traffic and see what it looks like, it's just a normal DNS query. What happens for a packet destined for an IP address on UDP port 50? What happens if you throw that on a wire somewhere? It'll just get passed along until DNS picks it up and figures out where it goes based on the fully qualified domain name, right? It is a problem, and there are many vendors out there that are coming up with solutions, and that's great, right? But I think the world would be a better place if we started working together and realizing some attacks make it all the way to that, in our case, a DNS server. It's not saying that your firewalls suck or this or that's bad or whatever. Listen, some DNS protection is better than nothing at all, right? But know the weapons, right? I was reading an article about, there's a lot of articles on DNS security. This one is talking about, it was well written. And it was talking about, how DNS is used for data exfiltration. And then his concluding paragraph, all you got to do is configure DNSSEC, and this problem will be fixed.
Okay. Yeah, I was wondering if you're going to talk about that a little bit.
That is not the solution.
Okay.
It is, even though it's DNSSEC security is implied in the name, it's talking about encrypting a communication to ensure that the client is really talking to the server. It has nothing to do with DNS queries. In fact, DNSSEC is another thing that can open you up to other attacks, amplification and reflection attacks. But that's a whole different story. Amplification and reflection attacks, also, that's on your authoritative name servers. If you want to really secure DNS, you got to secure it at every point. Your internal authoritative, whatever you have in the cloud, right? And the user's use of it and their communication. You don't want them picking up the payphone, dialing the operator, and that analogy to this can be devastating, right? Because all you need is someone that knows a little about the command prompt, that's disgruntled, or a piece of software on your network that's able to get a piece of data, encrypt it, create some DNS queries, and send it out.
Send it out to that DNS, that same attack
It's
I
gonna
originally
get right
referenced
there.
that you guys demonstrate all the time.
Absolutely. So this tool we got will actually create those DNS queries for you. And what's cool about the tool, it's a graphical interface, so you can interact with clicking buttons. But listen, I really want customers to understand this. I want them to roll up their sleeves, use this tool to create scripts for you, and run those scripts from your operating system. That way, you can't argue with me saying, well, how do I know that your DEX portal didn't just put this on the back end? Because I'll create because I'm assuming that you didn't want to take the time to program this, so we're creating it for you, and you can actually run these queries. And there's no argument between what you see going from your command line and what you see reported on the other server, right?
So what do you do to stop that? I mean, how do you?
Three ways. Three main techniques. There's reputational, behavioral, and signature. Okay, let me tackle signature first. Signature is like if there's a known network signature that it can identify, kill it right when we see it. Some examples would include Iodine is a popular open source DNS tunnel. But after you install it, it has a certain setup that can be identified using
fingerprint,
signature.
Basically, type you can see traffic fingerprint.
Yeah, but kind of at wire speed, right?
Right, yep.
So that's one method. The other method is using threat intelligence. Find yourself a good DNS provider that can give you a file in RPZ format, response policy zones, also known as DNS firewall. Right? You want to be able to take that so that the DNS server can load those zones in. And the way that mechanism works, query goes out, and then a response comes back. And if you have RPZ, response policy zones enabled, it'll compare what's coming in according to what you have configured. And if there's a match, you can take an action. Okay. And if not, it'll go through.
How does that handle the UDP thing?
Let me get, it has not, that's really two separate things.
Okay.
How it's bidirectional is just it's exploiting the nature of how the communication
Extending
works.
UDP, but it can be UDP, but they're not related like a TCP. It's just
Okay, so DNS is a distributed database.
Right, yep,
It's always
yep.
meant to be, right?
Right,
So
yep.
that, like, let's say if you're
authoritative. And,
yeah, exactly. You're the university, but you want to delegate biz to the business school,
Right.
biz.university.com, right? So it's meant to be distributed.
Mm-hmm.
But as the internet had evolved into what it is today, and now it's been consumerized. Oh shit! I lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Well, it's a distributed database.
It's a
obviously,
yes.
it was all over the place.
It's a
with all-
distributed database that was meant to do that, and it still does it. But today, it's more advantageous to consolidate that and centrally manage it.
Right. So are you basically saying you're like a framework
Yes.
that takes the part of the DNS world that you're involved in for this client and puts some basically structure around that?
Yes, we're making DNS enterprise worthy.
Right, okay.
Because think about what we
Like
do.
you said, the consumerization, you got all these things
Yes.
that are not enterprise worthy. And then,
But then we kind of come back full circle with BYOD, right? So now you
Right.
get these consumer-grade products that can get on your network. Then you have a whole other thing to worry about.
Right.
Here's my proposition to you. We are one of the first things that anything will talk to on your network.
correct.
Plug something in. If DHCP is configured, it'll send a broadcast.
Yep.
That broadcast will somehow get to us if your network's configured, whatever.
So you're dwelling out the IP addresses too?
As we're handing out the IP addresses, guess what? We can be smart about it and say, okay, let's just track this in a database. Now we have a history of lease history. We have a lease history on everything, on every client. Okay, so that's one argument of why Infoblox is a good place to manage IP addresses, and not only to manage it, but to trust that source as an authoritative source.
Sure. So when you separate the IP from the DNS, you lose something? So can I implement
Yes.
this without the IP?
Yes, yes. So not everything registers in DNS.
Right.
Right? So you might have records, you might have endpoints that if you only have DDI, DNS, DHCP, and then your database, but if your sources are to DNS and DHCP, you might have blind spots. You might have somebody that plugs in a Raspberry Pi and just assumes an IP address.
Sure.
It's not going to talk to DHCP.
Right, exactly.
So what makes Infoblox different? Network discovery.
Okay.
Right? So we're able, from the grid, to discover your network and to walk your network. Just with the credentials, SNMP and CLI, and we pull down the CAMP tables and ARP tables. You can have an endpoint that doesn't want to be detected, that has all the ports blocked. Traditional discoveries will probably not find it, but the switch port's not going to lie to me.
Well, it's going to see something going out on there, right?
So day one, I have DNS records, DHCP records. Let's say I turn on NetMRI, or I turn on the network discovery. It does its thing, collects the CAMP tables and ARP tables, and brings it back into the database. Now, everything that had a DNS record or everything that had a DHCP lease, now I know their switch port information.
Yep.
Now, everything that doesn't, now I know everything else. Visibility.
It's almost like doing a NAC light in some ways. You're not restricting
We have a
access, but
similar discovery to one of the
access control type.
yes,
world,
yeah, Forescout. We have a very similar discovery to that, and it's great. Obviously, it's working for Forescout. The value we add to that is, we have to ensure that this data is clean. So the data quality coming out of Infoblox is very clean. So you can actually use us next to Forescout and actually compare and validate that everything, that both those sources are the same. And what's cool is we can share that information throughout the ecosystem. We can share it into ServiceNow.
A source of truth in a
Yeah.
situation. Who becomes a source of truth when you have like a Netscope and yours? So what one is more reliable? How does that?
Just
is
use it all together.
Right, but I mean,
Yeah.
say they don't agree, so one's got to become the source of truth.
Well, you can't have two masters, right?
Right,
You know,
exactly.
one's
So
got to
is
be
there a reason why
authoritative
you
for
would choose
names.
one
and-
versus- oh.
Well, just functionality.
Right,
I mean,
yeah.
we're already
Native, you already got the name.
we're doing it
authoritative.
natively,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's only smart to be able to take that data and make it useful,
Mm-hmm.
right? People can certainly
What
try
about
to.
external DNS now? All the
yeah.
phishing attacks, so the stuff coming in,
The
the
stuff
other way
coming
around.
in, that's
Right,
a
yeah,
different-
that's
okay.
outbound. So let's talk about that.
Okay, so that's when someone wants to take down your DNS server. That's where our signature detection really shines, right? Because now we're able to, and this can be enforced at wire speed because the logic is built into the network interface, and there's rule sets that get applied to it. Rules that apply to DNS, to DHCP, even to NTP and OSPF, and BGP. Why? Because we can participate in any cast, and we serve NTP. So anything that's running on that appliance has a rule-based protection in front of it that's tunable. You know, you can set like rate limiting thresholds. You know, if you want, if too much request is coming from a certain IP address, you can throttle that sort of thing down to kind of, you know, shape traffic, or you can use it to mitigate attacks. You know, you can set up the signatures for iodine tunnels, for example, right? But that's how that works. It's an attempt to, before the packets actually hit the operating system, remember I said it's on the controller, that's where all the rule engines, and then there's a subscription, you pull down rules automatically, or you pull down rules from Infoblox, and then you can configure them, right? But this is happening at wire speed before it even hits the DNS engine that's running on the appliance. What does that mean? Someone can throw a volumetric attack at you, it's mitigated here, the OS is humming along. Same attack running through a Windows server, we took it down in minutes. Same attack running through a Linux server running bind with no protection, we took it down in about double the time that the Windows, but, you know.
All right, well, that's a lot of, you know, information about how you actually can tailor an open protocol like the DNS and get the controls around it needed to, I would say, make it enterprise worthy.
Make it enterprise worthy and actually adding value to it. Because now you have the ability, through our API, to automate a lot of this.
Right, yep.
Let's not let a human constraint be your bottleneck. If you're trying to you know, do an orchestration, provisioning hundreds, thousands of servers, they need IP addresses, they need DNS records, right?
Yep.
Automate that stuff.
Sure.
You can spin up and tear down workloads in minutes now. Right? Let the computers do what they're meant to do. And the cool thing about that orchestration, how many times, like in the old server days, it's easy to remember you have to register DNS, otherwise no one can reach your app.
Right.
How many times have you decommissioned servers and kind of forget to talk to the IPAM guy?
That's a huge problem
It
in
is.
a lot of enterprises.
Oh, I inherited quite a
We
mess.
have all these DNS entries, but what, are we using any of them or not?
Yeah.
And people don't know, and that's all
And that's
potential
where-
things people could set up in your network that
Yep.
you'd have no idea.
And that's where you can leverage our appliance with our reporting functionality. You can actually set up monitors for your resource records and see what's actually
Getting
hit.
used. Yeah.
Right, and obviously
That's
you can.
Otherwise,
you-
you have to guess, right? And
That's never
not a good
fun.
strategy. No.
Oh no, that's not a good strategy. I have other stories, but we'll save that
You end
for.
up more like Facebook if you try that.
Yee.
Probably. Yeah, all right. So-
No, yeah, in my
not
case,
that
I end up sleeping on the couch. But that's only
Oh, okay.
because when I worked at United, my wife was the senior manager of change management. She didn't pick favorites with me.
Uh-oh.
So yeah, if my changes went a little over, I was dragged into the cab meeting the next Tuesday. It sucked.
Ouch. Well, great.
Anyways,
Well, good. It was a lot of good information.
yeah. Did this answer your questions?
It did.
Good.
It's understanding that the DNS protocol by itself, you really can't just rely on. It can run on open source worlds, and the
Yeah.
bind is a de facto Unix thing. But if you don't tweak that and tune that, you're asking for trouble.
Yeah. Let me. I mean, here's my message. I just want to plead with the audience that as you're considering securing your DNS, don't just casually treat it like a checkbox, because it might bite you if you don't understand how it's really vulnerable. And it could vary in different environments depending on how they, their namespace or how DNS is used. It's worth at least having, have us come out and at least advise you on your DNS, right? And just kind of guide you through that process.
One last topic, and we'll call it.
Yeah.
When people use Active Directory internally for email for
DNS, yep.
versus using something like yourself, what potential challenges might they run into?
Especially as they grow larger, replication issues, right? You put a change and then it replicates. What if you ever back out that change? You might have conflicts. That sucks. Because in Windows DNS, it's by default multi-master. DNS wasn't meant to be multi-master, right? Because that
That's because
actually
of the domain
introduces.
controllers and how they work. Is that?
Yeah, the idea is for them to all be replicated and have the same data all the
Right,
time. I had, where I used to work, I had over 1 million resource records, and more than half of them were stale, right? And
And so those are static resource records and not a dynamically assigned resource record, right? Or are they both?
mostly statically assigned. Oh, we had some funky stuff, man. Yeah, it's important to have a DNS strategy in your company, and not be the guy that inherits something that had been abandoned for a few
Right, oh, yeah,
years.
no, we've seen that. I saw that, I was working with a client 15 years ago that brought
Yeah.
Infoblox in that. They said, well, we don't know what's in these records, that's in use or not, so we're just gonna migrate it all over to the new DNS
man, if you
servers.
run into any customers that are like that, that maybe someone had moved on, yeah, get us in. We'd love to get in front of them and, yeah, get the systems cleaned up.
So that brings me to my last question here, is that Infoblox has been around for a while,
Yep.
right? I've been in and around it for a long time. So what are the main reasons why customers don't have Infoblox? Or, even one of your competitors, but why is
Yeah.
it that they don't have Infoblox?
Infoblox is an enterprise-grade solution. We're in, 94 of the Fortune 100, right? These aren't small deployments typically. So in the past, historically, it had been cost prohibitive, for companies to get it. Compelling events was a driver. In my case, where I'd worked, the DNS system that we were running on was old. I'm not exaggerating when I said that the company I worked for didn't have a DNS engineer, because they went through some things, restructuring, right? They had to let people go, but they still had to run their business, and they run it the best they could. But by the time I had my hands on that system, I had to deal with the server team because the servers were end of life. I had to deal with the server team again because the OS was not patchable. I had to deal with the vendor because in the time that the engineer was gone, we had a DDI vendor communicating directly with the user, and the user was giving requirements. But it came directly from the user. It wasn't vetted. So things were done to the system that made the underlying data. I said I had 1 million records with more than half of them stale. It needed a lot of work, right? And think about that alone. You don't know what you're going to run into. You know you need DNS, but you might run into a real mess, like wiring closet mess. You might run into something very cool. You just don't know. So a hesitation had been, it's expensive, or it's hard, or it's too risky to migrate over. Listen, don't wait till you're in a situation like I was in where, outages were imminent because the hardware was old and it was insecure. Sometimes you do have to make those hard decisions. But guess what? Today, you don't have to boil the ocean overnight. We can take it in phases. We can take it as fast or as slow as your company and your change management want to move, right? We can start with IPAM only. You can continue to run on Microsoft, and we can do like an overlay mode where we're talking to Microsoft via RPC and WMI calls and just synchronizing data. You can turn on read-write mode and start managing it and start hitting the API. But you'll still have the limitations of Windows DNS, but at least you've opened the door for management through Infoblox. And then as you're ready, maybe the next project is, let's build out that Infoblox system and let's migrate DHCP over. That's pretty straightforward. And then you kind of get used to it, whatever. And then maybe let's take internal DNS. You talked about external DNS. That's similar to how we rolled it out, right? Because we had to roll it out in phases. So guess what? You don't have to buy the whole thing day one. Start with IPAM only maybe, or maybe start with DNS security, right? Where do you find the most risk? And we can certainly be positioned similar to like how an open DNS is. Just create a profile and then configure your DNS servers, send recursive queries up to our cloud.
So if you're doing IP address management on a spreadsheet, they need to give you a call.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, and if they have us and they're still using spreadsheets, definitely give me a call.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Tony, thanks for traveling across the whole country here for IT Trendsetters.
Oh, no,
Appreciate it.
you guys are one of my favorites. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, Tony. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Yep.